Now that you have designed how your widget looks like, let's try to get it to work and actually interact with elements within the overall project. What you would need to do is to come in again into the editor, and let's explore another very critical part of the widget system, which is the data source. Within the data source, there are many different types that you can create. Under this instance, we would want to create a data source that would be able to link to the actual text itself of this push, the word set push. And then we also want to have another data source that is managing the event of when someone is clicking on the actual button itself. So let's come in here and create a data source. And what we want to look for is the parameter. And what here we would want to then change this to be the string. And we can come in here and we can then say, this is the label. And I can now say, this is push button, for example. Now that we have this as a string, we can come in here and look at the label. And right at the label, the actual label value itself, there is a little tag. And from here, we can actually look at the parameter, which is the data source parameter, and we can then link it to that. So now this is linked to the data source called label, and the value is right over here, and the text is push button. So why we would want to do this is so that when we close this widget, when people are interacting with the widget that you have designed, under the data source, they now can actually have this. So they can then come in here and they can say button 1, and they can then change the text without having to go in and actually manually into the editor and actually change how that text is rendered. So that just makes for people who are using your widget that you have designed, you can expose basically these parameters or the data source and linking them to the internal elements of the widget that you have created. Next, another data source that we want to look at is another parameter type, but the type now is called trigger, and that's all. We can then come into the button itself, and under the button interface, there is the trigger. Again, under the tag, we can then say, it would be helpful if we just change the name to be trigger. It's easier for us to tell what it is. Parameter, trigger, value. There we go. So now we actually have that events being linked and exposed, basically. And just a very critical element, as you can see in a lot of the data source, there is the option where it says two-way. For a trigger parameter, we do want it to be a two-way parameter because when people are interacting with or the user who is interacting with the widget that you have designed, you want those events to be then surfaced back up and be able to create an event and actually be able to pick up that event and do something with it. For a label, in our instance, people are not particularly going to be interacting with the actual widget itself when it is in the play mode to then actually type in the text. They're mostly interacting or changing the text purely just from the data source directly. So in this instance, it probably makes more sense where we are disabling this two-way and making sure that it's only that is from the data source. It is then pushing that information down into the widget, but the widget itself is not then surfacing back up and then updating what this value is. In other instances, maybe this is not just a label, this is a text field. So in those situations, then it would make more sense to keep the two-way option enabled so that when people are actually using your widget in the play mode, they can come in and actually edit and change the text directly from here. But for a button in our instance, we are not interested in allowing people to change the text from here. And we only want to let them interact by clicking of the button. And for us within your project to be able to know and update the rest of the system of that event of someone has changed or trigger that event. So that is how you would want to define some basic data source, and particularly the option whether you want a parameter to be a two-way parameter or whether it is a one-way by disabling it.